Good evening and welcome back to the Speaker's Corner UK channel. 3 evenings in a row. This must be a record. Both Stops and I are available. So we thought we'd do another review here of a video that was sent to us where Apostate Prophet has some interaction. I think it's an edited video, but he has some interaction with 4 Muslims. And some people think these guys are quite well-versed in philosophy. So we're going to take a look and see what thoughts we can add to this video. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Stop Spamming. Good evening, sir.
Hi, guys. Welcome to a wonderful evening. And we're going to take it very easy. At least I am.
Good. Sounds good. Stops has been hard at work with other things going on there. So that's all good. And I've been hard at work with clients. So it's time for us to take it a little bit easier. So without further ado, welcome if you just joined us, and welcome if you are watching this as a recording. So we've posted in the description of this video, you'll see the original video. Please do subscribe to Apostate Prophet's channel. It's in the text chat as well. And if you follow the link in the text description, that'll take you to his channel where this video is as well. So with that said, let us bring up this video.
What is this thing called? 1 ex-Muslim versus 4 Muslims. Allah is not forgiving.
Yeah, so this is on the Apostate Prophet's channel, and it's here him speaking to 4 of these other Muslims. So it's Yusuf Pondus, Abdul, Sharif, and Jake, the Muslim metaphysician. So they've got some other channel of their own as well. So good on him for going on with 4 Muslims. I think these guys are far more reasonable in the sense that they have a proper discussion, unlike Hamza's Den. So this should be a higher level conversation, at least compared to Hamza's Den, although that isn't much of a benchmark to hold against. So let's see how this goes. And without further ado, here we go.
The major reason, still one of the major reasons why I do not believe in the one God, specifically the God of Islam, is the problem of hell. I simply think that the idea of creation, free will, afterlife, and hell is completely incoherent and inconsistent with our understanding of morality.
Okay, so there he's put in there, it's incoherent, it's inconsistent, and suddenly something's happened to my audio here. So I suddenly can't hear now. So apologies on that.
Oh.
Yeah,
because you sounded normal.
Yeah, sorry about that. No, I'm coming through on the mic fine, but suddenly my hopefully that's working now. Suddenly my earphones, which is what I'm listening through, ran out of battery power. As soon as I plugged the other one in, it tried to connect to the phone. There we go. Now I can hear you. So it's incoherent. So incoherent, in my view, is there's some sort of logical violation of the principle of logic. That's at least how I understand incoherent. Inconsistent with our morality and inconsistent with Islam's own morality. Okay, so let's see how that plays out. So that's one of the reasons that he's not a Muslim, because of the idea of hell and its inconsistency, as I understand it.
And even with Islam's own understanding of morality, for example, or with God's understanding of morality, if you want to have it so. So the idea is that there was one God at the very beginning before he created anything. Then he did create a world, a universe, and beings within this universe. Then he did give certain beings or certain creatures within this universe free will, and he gave them the choice to believe in him or to disbelieve in him after he communicated his message to them. Depending on whether they believe or do not believe, they will go to heaven or hell. Yet Allah, or God, at the very beginning is almighty, all-knowing, and he's the greatest good. And yet, at the very beginning, knowing exactly what we will do with our free will, how we will be, where we will end, he still created millions, billions of humans that are bound to go to hell. The whole idea that free will exists, that he creates free beings, that he judges them and sends some to hell, necessarily concludes that numerous humans will necessarily go to hell. It is inevitable. It is part of the whole plan. I think that this makes the belief in God for me and for many other people impossible, especially in the Islamic God.
Are you saying God?
Okay, so hopefully, I mean, that's pretty clear, isn't it? Go ahead, Stops.
No, I was just going to say, I actually want to go one up on this, because what happens is the first sentence in the Quran says, "I am the most merciful." Okay, so it puts itself up as a charitable, very benign sort of a ruler, and at the same time knows full well that 90% of every population of all humans, let's put it this way, 90% of all humans will go to hell for eternal torture. And this is absolutely not coherent.
Yeah, well, as you say, it's so we'll see what they say now. I don't remember off the top of my head. So either they're going to say it's probabilistic the case that God knows that a certain number of people are going to, that's the best they could do, or that it's certain that X number of people, more than 50% of people will go to hell. In which case you've created these people knowing that X number are going to hell, or that it's probabilistic that it's one of those two. And if there's an all good God, now they need to provide a good reason for why God knows this is the case and would allow this to be the case. Now, they could probably come up with something, but is it going to be persuasive to any of us? I doubt it, but let's see what they say. I think it's going to be a mountain to climb for them to explain this.
God punishes people in hell, therefore a good God does not exist. It's a logical argument. Or are you saying, I don't like it, so I don't want to believe in this God?
He created me as this flawed being who is incapable to grasp this truth. And he punishes me for what he himself created while calling himself the most forgiving and the most good. And he
Okay, good. So there he's got it up on screen as well, right? Because he's the most forgiving, right? This is something you've got to pass out. Now, I don't remember if he does, but I would be asking a Muslim at this stage, what does it mean to be the most forgiving? What I'm looking for a Muslim to eventually get to, or to see that he arrives at, is that in any possible logical circumstance, God would forgive you. That's what it seems to me most forgiving means. Now, a Muslim could take a different view, and try to define that differently. But then obviously I'm going to, and presumably other people will as well, have a critique against that. Because if there's any circumstance in which we could imagine, a God being more forgiving, then that would mean God, Allah is not the most forgiving. So that's not something you could do. So it sort of very much hinges on what it means, whether there's agreement on what it means to be most forgiving. And once you've got agreement on that, I think you can move forward. So obviously for him here, it's the punishment, but then claiming to be most forgiving, right? I'm not sure about the incapable to grasp the truth. I think, he's created human beings flawed. That's true. I don't know whether they're going to contest that. And that in and of itself is a problem, because it's like you're creating a robot with a bug in the system. Now, I think they would argue, and I would consider that we are capable of, grasping truth, or at least when you say grasping truth, that we have some reliable mechanisms that will lean us towards truth and away from falsity. Not that it's guaranteed, but there's some level of our cognitive abilities that are reliable. So I'm not sure that I would, accept the incapable of grasping truth, if what he means by incapable is that we can't get certain truth. Right? You get certainty, then yeah, sure, I'm going to agree with that. So again, it depends on what he means by that. Mm-hmm.
I think it's a reference to the sealed heart.
Okay, and so so that reference there, meaning that it is impossible for you to, what does that mean? To be impossible to know that God exists, or to be impossible to accept him even if you knew he exists? What's the
No, to grasp the truth, to understand the message.
Yeah, so presumably it's God's message and that he exists, right? Ultimately, if you boil it down to the bottom layer, it's to understand that God exists and that he sent this particular message. And what you're saying is,
the heart is sealed so that you are unable to obey. You are a rebel. You are a kafir who intentionally covers the truth, because your heart is sealed and you cannot understand the truth.
Yeah, so that's a okay. So maybe he's also pointing in that direction, and that's an additional point, right? Because how do they reconcile claiming that you have free will and that your heart is covered, right? That's the same sort of thing as God knowing that you're going to hell. And so how do they respond? But it's good there, because I think there's a number of words there that one would need to pass out. I'm not sure whether they'll do it in the video itself, but let's see how they respond to this.
Contradicts with himself on so many levels.
I mean, I don't agree with everything you said there, if that's your representation of Islam. But that aside, I just want to note it on where's the contradiction.
The contradiction is Allah is not the most forgiving. I am more forgiving than Allah in this case.
Why?
Because I would forgive people for much bigger faults, for much bigger crimes, for much bigger ignorances.
No, but so his forgiveness is not unconditional. He says that God does not forgive for people to associate partners with him, right? So there's a condition there, right? It's not unconditional.
Okay, so but that's problematic, right?
Yeah.
That's very problematic. I think because they do talk about it now. I'm not sure I'd use the word contradiction, because contradiction is normally, it's both A and not A or something like that, which is the logical form that a contradiction normally takes. So I'm not sure whether I would use the term as strongly as a contradiction, but there's certainly, I don't know. What do you think there? Would you use the word contradiction?
I would definitely use the word contradiction, and I would definitely, what is this guy's name? Abdul. I think he's being disingenuous, let's put it this way, by automatically saying, well, he does not forgive shirk or the, associating partners. That is not the claim. The claim is in general that you are being told you don't understand the stuff, but in actual fact, you're being prohibited, or you're being held back to understand stuff, and then you're getting punished for it. So the contradiction is that you are told that he is totally the most forgiving, the most merciful, the everything, and yet he's giving you the maximum punishment. And those two things don't work together. So it's as soon as I am a little bit merciful, I must, by necessity, go down from the maximum punishment to a certain extent. But to go down from maximum punishment in Islam to a certain extent means you have to go away from hell, which doesn't happen. So the God is merciful and at the same time assigning maximum punishment. That is what I call the contradiction here.
Okay, okay. So there's two ways to look at this. One is that there's the free will and the closed heart, which seems to be a contradiction. You can't have freedom and yet be prevented from doing something, because that takes away from your free will. And the other is this idea that God is most merciful, and yet he has a condition where he does not invoke mercy. So what one could then ask the question in that case, well, hang on a moment, if God were to forgive shirk, right, because that's the example he brought up, would that be more merciful? And the answer seems to be straightforwardly yes. So if there's this one condition where he's not merciful, then it seems to me, and that's why, again, it's very important to tie down what they understand to be most merciful. Now, they might try and say, well, he's most merciful except for this. Well, then, none of us are going to accept that. So it's very key to have, and it's not clear here that they've had that conversation, to mean what it means to be most merciful. Is that every circumstance where he could possibly invoke mercy, he does, in which case you couldn't bring this up. And so, yeah, I think there's two different things going on, and both of them, there does seem to be a contradiction in that sense in both of them, right? So, yeah, I'm not sure how he's going to, pass this out. Let's see if he's got some explanation to overcome this.
Aside from that, anything else he can forgive. Even if you want to say you're more forgiving, whether or not that's true, I just don't see, if you're trying to make a logical argument and say there is a contradiction, I don't see a contradiction.
That is fallacious, because that's like me saying, hey, I'm not a thief, but sometimes I like to steal food when I'm hungry, but I'm still not a thief. No,
it's not the same. It's not the same. It's saying God saying he is the most forgiving is contextualized within Islam, right? So forgiveness comes at certain conditions, right?
Okay, so I think this is just sophistry, right? What does it mean to be
I'm sorry.
Context in which you would not be forgiving? I think that's just sophistry language, right? And he's sort of brought it up there. Allah is the most forgiving within his own context. Well, exactly. then it becomes unintelligible, because then what you're saying is that he's most forgiving, and it's by a standard that is by no way that we can judge that. And if that's the case, and this is not my words, but the philosopher Jeremy Koons, when you don't have any context by which you can do it, and he's saying, but in his own context, it then becomes unintelligible. So this is, in my view, sophistry type language that makes the claim of most merciful literally unintelligible. Now we've got no way to assess what it means to be most merciful.
And within that context, God is the most forgiving, because forgiving isn't all he is. He is also the most just. You can think it's evil.
You can arbitrarily say that forgiveness comes with conditions, and Allah made those conditions clear, which is why when he does not forgive you for not believing in him, that is not a contradiction, because he made the condition very clear. You could say that. Well,
it's not arbitrary. It's not arbitrary. I gave you the verse. I mean, there's a condition. It's there, so it's not arbitrary. He mentioned it. I'm not making an ad hoc, exception here.
With regards to this concept of being the most forgiving, the idea that can give a particular example where you think you would forgive where Allah doesn't make you more forgiving? Because we can think of this in terms of quantity. So how many things can you forgive compared to how many things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can forgive? So he's an...
Okay, this is a very bad analogy, right? This is, or this line of reasoning is, because again, all we have to do is a hypothetical. Given a certain number of things you can forgive, we could easily see a human forgiving just one more, which is, forgiving shirk. So if you could forgive 1,000 things in a year, and Allah had the same things, but he forgave 999 and one was shirk, which he didn't forgive. In that circumstance, you would be. Now, I think what he's going to try and do is say, oh, well, Allah will outlive you. So Allah can forgive more than you. So by Yusuf's lights, that's what he means by most. And I think that's a very weird, odd, left field type of way. And that's why it's like I said in the beginning, right? You've got to get clear on what it means to be most merciful. To me, it means that in every circumstance, not that most meaning the number of quantity, right? Because then obviously you can just say, well, he outlives us. But if it were the case, then we just have to say, well, if we could live as long as God, or we could take it over a certain finite period of time, then we could be most merciful, even by your own definition. So the only way you can make this work is to say, well, he beats us by quantity, and the only reason he beats us by quantity is because he can outlive us. But then that particular line of reasoning is moot. Nobody's going to accept that, because all that means is that he's doing it longer than us. And if hypothetically we had that ability, we would then actually be most merciful, or more merciful than him. So that's just, to me, this is a terrible line of reasoning. And it's not one that I would have expected somebody to make either.
He's an eternal being, and there are countless beings being forgiven for countless acts. Now, if he can forgive them for that, he is objectively more forgiving than you. So he is the most forgiving.
Did I understand that correctly? Are you saying that the fact that Allah is eternal and there are endless things that he can forgive and endless occasions on which he can forgive, the high quantity of forgiveness that Allah can give means that he is necessarily more forgiving than me, because I cannot forgive as many things that Allah can forgive?
Yeah. That's what most forgiving is. Being the most...
Okay, why would anybody accept that? I wouldn't accept that at all. And I'm going to take issue with that, and I have done, as I've just said there. I don't know about you, Stops, what your thoughts are there.
This is why I'm laughing. I think this is quite cheeky. How can you say, if somebody says they're all powerful, well, then they are all powerful because they can do it whenever they need to over the course of their lives? That's not what all powerful means. All powerful means you're all powerful all the time and every time, not just under certain circumstances. And yet he is saying, well, because Allah is eternal, there's lots of times that he is, and he is more. And this is the crazy thing. This is where I want to start giggling hysterically, that he is. The total number. This is a quantity. So the total number of instances where he forgives something is much higher than mine as a human being, because I'm living 70, 80 years and he's living 70 million or something. That is so silly.
But not only that, right? He's equivocating on more and most. They're not the same thing. If the Quran said he's more merciful, and the Quran said, and the reason I'm more merciful is, and by the way, it's not countless or infinite anyway, because there was a definite, even by their lights, beginning to the universe and a beginning to the human race, and there'll be an end, right? It's not as if the human race will live eternally, right? So there's this finite amount of time that the human race lives, and there's this finite amount of time that he can forgive the human race. Presumably, he doesn't forgive anything else, so they're only talking about the human race, and that's certainly a finite amount of time, any which way you look at it. But if it were the case that the Quran said, oh, I'm more merciful than any human can be, and the reason I'm more merciful is because I will outlive all of you, and therefore I can produce more mercy, well, fine, but that's a trivial point, right? Because if God gave us the ability to live as long as he did, or at least to live as long as he did to forgive humans or offer mercy to humans, then we could, because if he's got a condition and we don't have a condition on mercy, then by definition we would be more merciful. So all we have to do is include that, because then you're comparing apples with apples. At the moment you're comparing apples and oranges, but exactly. Number two, it's more and most are not the same thing. Right? So if you say you're more, then it is quantity, but most, in this case, when you read this, and virtually everybody I've ever spoken to, or anybody who understands this topic, most is seemingly a logical idea, and it's in any one circumstance, he would be the ultimate in mercy. Right? So this idea of quantity is just not one that I would accept, and it's not one that most people talk about when they say most. Oh, sorry. Yeah, when they say most. Sure, if you said more, then yes, you could say quantity. That is about quantity, but most isn't necessarily, and not in this context. So it's a very strange idea, this of trying to use quantity and then say more, but then equivocating that with most. Right? I would immediately pull him up and say, no, I don't accept that. Why ought I? And I explain what I explained now and go, hang on a moment, that's what I mean by most. And then you can maybe talk about it with, like you said, omnipotence or something like that, right? Which is the most powerful. Does that mean that he can invoke more power than anybody else? Or does it mean that in every circumstance, he has the greatest power possible, logically possible? But he's going to probably say, hopefully, he's going to say you have the greatest power logically possible. But then it means the same thing with this most merciful. In any circumstance, he's logically the most merciful he could be in any one circumstance, not in all combined circumstances. So it's apples and oranges, very strange, this.
No,
the
this
most
is
forgiving
not
means that you
high
forgive.
level.
I mean,
Sorry?
So I was going to say, this is not the high level that I would expect.
Yeah, the other guys haven't spoke, so I don't remember if they jump in and say something here, but that wasn't a good response by Yusuf, no.
Ridwan, so what Yusuf is saying here, I mean, just even if you can disagree with that, but then you have to accept that if that is the understanding of most forgiving as presented in Islam, which is a possible explanation, then there's no direct inconsistency.
How do you guys define?
Okay, but then the question is, what's your backing that's
Exactly.
the majority or the most clear understanding of that, and more importantly, Abdul, is that what you accept, right? Put him on the spot. Do you have the same understanding? Because all he's saying there is that it's a possible explanation. Well, that's a trivial point. I could have anything that's logically consistent and say it's a possible explanation. That doesn't get us any closer to what does it actually mean in Islam. So do you accept what Yusuf said, or do you have a different understanding? If you accept what Yusuf said, can you show me where it's clear that that is the majority opinion and how they came to that? And I think those two questions you wouldn't get an answer on in a stream like this, or at all, probably. Maybe
you can always avoid that by doing what I always suggest, and that is not saying what is in the Quran, but asking them what they think is in the Quran. This always helps a great deal if you don't have to do what is happening now.
Yeah. So show me where in the Quran you think it says what Yusuf says, if that's what you do. But I'd ask him straight out, right? Do you accept that? Do you think that is the most plausible, reasonable explanation of what most merciful means? Get him to either agree or disagree with his colleague there, not to sidestep and go, oh, well, it's one logical possibility. I'm not interested in 50 million different ones. What I want to know is, what do you think the most reasonable explanation is for most merciful? And now if he's going to be intellectually honest, he's either going to agree with Yusuf or he's going to disagree. Right? And then you can take it from there. But he's skating a line here of not disagreeing and just saying that it's one possible solution and not giving his view on what it is.
Exactly.
And you've got three other guys there. Do they agree with us?
Nothing.
I mean, I'm not aware of anybody else. This is the first time I've ever heard somebody come up with this sort of explanation for what it means to be most merciful. And he actually didn't say most, he said more, right? And then he equivocated with most at the end to try and make it sound as if it's the same. And to me, it's not the same.
Define most forgiving. How do you define most forgiving?
Yusuf just gave a perfectly reasonable answer.
Is most forgiving does most forgiving to you just mean somebody who forgives in the most cases, or who has the highest quantity of forgiveness?
It's not unconditional. So
okay, there you go. So that was great by Apostate Prophet. He asked him, what do you mean by most forgiving, right? And what we're hearing from Abdul here is not a straightforward answer. Either he agrees that it's in the most number of cases, or it's in every logical possible case that would be forgiven. Right? Which one of those two?
And look at the body language. Go back 2 seconds if you can and watch you.
Prevarication, right? I'm not going to answer that directly. I'm going to say some other words, right? The hands come up. It's like a barrier in front of a person, to prevent giving a straightforward answer. Right? Interesting. Yeah. Good observation there with the body movement.
So the problem is here, Ridwan, is that you are looking at one attribute of God, right? So he is the most forgiving, but that's contextualized because he's also just, right? He has wrath, he punishes, right? So you can have multiple attributes that maybe on the face of it sound contradictory, but once you contextualize it and be a bit charitable towards the text, there is a coherent picture. So
okay, let me ask you a question, Abdul. If I say to you, I am the most merciful, the most forgiving guy out there, but if you call me names, then I will come and shoot you.
Yeah, it
I
depends
might
on-
be
it depends on-
clear, but I'm also the most forgiving, the most merciful, the most kind, and the most just person out here.
No, I wouldn't think you're, based on, this contextualized, human experience we have. No, I do not think, because I know what we
How does
mean.
that make the question? How does it change the?
Because, okay, so right now, you are saying that God, being the most forgiving, should rule out the possibility of him justly, according to the Islamic position, punish people in hell. That's not that's not a contradiction. It might be something that you don't like.
Yes, yeah. So that is it. Okay, so but now you have the burden, Abdul, to reconcile these two. And just to appeal to Islam as if that somehow answers it, that doesn't say anything. That's vacuous. You could say according to Pinocchio, you could say according to whoever, but what we're looking for is an argument, not appealing to your religion. We have to show how you can reconcile these two positions, right? And you're not doing that, at least not so far.
And I think it's not, right? So, but it is
contradiction is A and not A.
Okay,
Exactly.
I said it is incoherent and contradictory on many levels. It is incoherent because, for example, God is supposedly creating humans and putting them through a test, and then judging them based on the results of this test, and punishing them, burning them forever, or even rewarding them forever. I think even the reward part is incoherent and unjust, if you want to have it so. Allah is not really judging people for something that they have done wrong and which could have not been.
Okay, so here's his view. He's put it up on screen. Allah creates humans flawed. Humans fail. Allah blames humans. Humans fail because Allah created them flawed. Allah punishes humans for his failure. This is illogical, not just immoral. Okay, so yes, he creates us flawed. I agree. It's humans fail. Yes, they do. He blames humans. Yes, he does. Humans fail because of Allah. Allah punishes them. So that's not illogical. I'm just looking to see where that's illogical. I think that's, we could say the word flawed. Yeah, I think that's flawed. We could certainly say that's immoral. That in and of itself, I'm just looking to see. I mean, I don't know if you see it there. I don't see a logical contradiction. If you added in the word free will, then yes, then it would be illogical. But he's not saying the word flaw. He's not adding in free will there. So yes, that is, he's creating you with a fail. He knows you're going to fail, and then he's punishing you for the flaw that he inserted into you. That would be immoral. But in and of itself, I think he has to add an extra premise of free will there for it to be illogical, at least on my reading there. I don't know if I'm missing something, Stops.
Okay, I see the same thing, that I am being created knowing what will happen, regardless of free will. I'm looking at the concept now. So if I create anything, a pen, I've got a pen here. So I'm creating
Just
a pen.
robot, right? It's a nice
Sorry?
example. Just make it a robot, right? Like
it's a pen which I know will not write, and then I punish the pen for not writing, even though I created it. So
yeah.
That is illogical, and not just immoral, because illogical is the fact that I am creating a pen that cannot write. So that's, in my eyes, that is illogical, and it's immoral for punishing the pen for something that I failed to do.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't see it being illogical, because you could create something that doesn't work 100%. Or you're using the example of a pen that doesn't write at all. I think we just need something that's a bit more closer to the example that he's providing there. So humans can possibly pass the test or whatever, but they could fail. That's why I think like a robot, where you've programmed in a couple of bugs, and there's a particular task that the robot is likely to perform in its lifetime, and because of a bug, it's automatically going to fail. And the moment it fails because of that bug, you then punish it. I don't see that as being illogical, because, again, to my mind, illogical means that you need to violate a principle of logic. And normally it's a contradiction. And I don't see a contradiction. I just see it being acting immorally.
Yeah, but the thing is that I'm inserting there that this thing is, I know in advance.
Yeah, well, that's fine. But I still don't see it being illogical. I just see that being immoral.
Okay, for me, it's illogical that I go and create something that I know does not do what I want it to do, what it's supposed to do, because a pen only has one function, and that is to write. And now, if I'm going and saying I'm creating a pen, the only function of a pen is to write, and I know it's not going to write, and I still go ahead and create it, that is illogical.
Okay, but that's okay. So there's the presupposition that you have in there that I don't, right?
Yes.
You're presupposing that the pen is supposed to write.
Correct. This is the knowledge of its function. Yes.
Yeah, but that's I think a presupposition that I'm not sure that one could grant there, because if he's all-knowing and he creates a pen that doesn't write, then it seems to me he knows that pen is not going to write. So we can't have the presupposition that it ought to write.
Well,
Because
that's the
if
function of a
he
pen.
knows
That's
all
what I'm
things,
saying.
yeah, but that's then I think that's then I think you and I would differ there, because if he's all knowing and he creates something that we would normally expect to write, but in this case doesn't write, we can't say that. At least I don't think that we can say then that he created something that is supposed to write and didn't, because he knew that it wouldn't write. He has the power to make it write, and he made, in your analogy, the pen not to write. So it was never supposed to write. And if it wasn't, if it was never supposed to write, yeah.
But then it's illogical. Why would you create a pen knowing it doesn't write?
Because you have some other consideration for it, right? In
No.
this case,
This
you
is
want
what
to
I'm excluding.
punish the pen. As an
This is
example
why
to
I
other
excluded
pens,
it.
use your
That's why I
example.
didn't go to the robot, but I went to the pen exactly for this reason, because a robot can have different functions. A pen can't. You can only use a pen for one thing, and that is to write.
No,
And if
wow.
you-
I mean, can you? You could use a pen for something else, right? You could use a pen to pick a lock or to stab somebody. I mean, you could come up with other functions, but regardless, even if there was no other function, that you could use the pen for, I think you could still use it as a tool, like as an example, right? You're making an example to go, look, I have this power, I've done this. All other pens, be aware, this is what can happen. That's why I'm not as fond of the idea of a pen. But there was no chance. Yeah, there was no chance that this pen could write. Normally pens write. In this case, it didn't write. So to say that it ought to have written and he created, then it didn't, that wouldn't apply in this case, at least as far as I can tell. Because there was never a chance that this pen could have written, this particular pen. So you have something that would normally write, but he knew it didn't write, and therefore supposed to write wouldn't apply here. Because he could just come back and say, yes, it looked like it was going to write, but I have a greater purpose for it not writing, which is to teach somebody a lesson or whatever the case is. And that would be very difficult to argue against from our point of view. Because all he has to do is give another purpose or a greater reason why this pen didn't write, and then he's answered the question. You might not like the answer, but as long as you're given a coherent answer, that is something that isn't illogical, then I don't think you could bring an objection in that room, because he can just come up with any ad hoc reason, and there's nothing you can say other than, well, I don't think that's a good reason, but that's not the criteria that would sort of sink the argument, if you like. You'd have to show that it's not possible for him to have any reason that is coherent. Then it would be illogical. Then I'd agree with you. So if you could show that there was no reason for which the pen didn't write, then it would be illogical. Yeah, then I'd be going, okay, you're right. So interesting. You and I can talk more about it, I guess. But yeah, I'm not convinced on the illogical. I'm certainly convinced on the immoral side of it. Let's see if there's anything more. Maybe he says something or they do, and maybe I'll concede there's something I've missed. That's fine as well.
Been prevented by himself, or which they are really powerful enough to prevent. He punishes them for something that he himself in the very beginning caused.
Yeah, but it seems to me, Ridvan, sorry, because right now, in order for you to make a logical argument, you can't sneak in I'm not saying sneak in a bad way. You can't sneak in your views on metaethics, what morality is, and what it means to be good and bad. You can't sneak that in without us addressing it. So right now, if you're making an argument purely based on a logical incoherence, you have to say that being the most forgiving necessitates that God does not punish people in hell. God punishes people in hell, therefore God is not the most forgiving. You have to make that, but we will dispute premise one very clearly. Are you not allowing us to dispute premise one?
No, you can't do that. I just think, even on that point, you have a big misrepresentation of what most forgiving would mean or how it would be defined. So let's not even come to the fact that Allah is eternal, almighty. His lifetime exceeds my lifetime by a mathematically impossible number, which is why my forgiveness is incomparable to his forgiveness.
But you're a subjectivist, aren't you? Aren't you a subjectivist?
It doesn't matter. I'm not saying it's morally wrong. It doesn't matter. I'm saying it's incoherent.
Forgiving is a moral judgment. Someone being forgiving, that's a moral judgment. Isn't what is most forgiving to you a subjective view that's not necessarily representative of an objective reality and the way things ought to be?
I'm not.
Okay, this is a red herring now in my view again, because all we needed in the very beginning, you see, that's why it happened with the review yesterday and the day before as well. You've got to get clear on some of these words, especially with people that are a bit more nuanced in the conversation. If you have the Hamzas and stuff, even then it would be useful, but it's less likely to be helpful. But with somebody like this, who's a bit more sophisticated potentially, you need to agree on these terms up front. What does it mean to be most forgiving? Because now we're going down a rabbit hole. hey, you're a subjectivist, etc. All we need to do is agree on what most forgiving is. And if he says, well, what I mean by most forgiving is he forgives everything except shirk, now we have a disagreement, because to me that's logically not the most forgiving. There's a circumstance in which he is not forgiving, therefore, by my view at least, he's very forgiving but not most forgiving, because there's a circumstance in which he isn't. So now he will have to give up. And of course, I'm not going to accept Yusuf Ponder's view on that. I think that's not a view that I think is substantive. So now we have to ask Abdul, what does he mean by most forgiving? So this is the problem when you don't nail down some of these terms in the very beginning. And now it seems to me now we're going to go off on a bit of a tangent here. Now they're going to challenge him on his moral view here when we could have had agreement in the very beginning.
Really a subjectivist in that sense. I don't think that morals are true or false in any sense. They are simply representations of our emotions about certain things for which we make rules based on a need to survive. I don't think that they are subjectively or objectively true or false. But aside from that,
forgiveness. So you're an emotivist. You're an emotivist in the sense that you think that all moral propositions are reducible to emotional, emotional stances or emotional positions. It's inconsistent for you to say that there couldn't be an opposing emotional position on what it means to be the most forgiving or the most good.
But you can't judge us by.
Okay, but that's fine. But then you have to give your position. You see, and AP didn't challenge you. So now he's saying, well, okay, if you're a emotivist, I'm not sure if AP is or if he knows what that means, because that's certainly a view that you can take. I suppose it's not one that I agree with. I wouldn't be taking AP's position on morals. Sure, but somebody else could have it. But what we need from Abdul is, what does he mean? You see, again, that's why we need to get clear in the beginning, because now we're haggling over what most merciful means. And this should have been done in the beginning, but now there's baggage behind it. And so now it's very unlikely there's going to be agreement on what most merciful means. So you need it in the beginning before you start to add all the baggage, because now they're going to be very cagey about what they mean by most merciful, because you've already gone down a route here and they don't want to be inconsistent. So they're going to be very cagey about what they mean. And what we want is where they're not cagey, where they're being straightforward, and giving a definition in the beginning that you can hold them to. So it's key out of this, I think, this learning of, defining things up front and not later on.
Just by my worldview, or what you think my worldview would be, or what you think what my morals would be, based on Islam's own, in a sense. Even let's forget about Islam. Forgiveness is a concept that we humans have established. We establish certain rules based on what hurts us, harms us, or what benefits us and pleases us. Somebody who forgives is somebody who looks past the mistakes that others have made and tries to, reconcile the bad with the good and tries to make peace and tries to be merciful with that person. Somebody who looks past it and says, hey, you know what? Despite everything you've done, I forgive you. That person would be, in a regular society, be considered the most forgiving person, for example. If we now look at God, on the other hand, God, or Allah in this case, is a being, an eternal being, who creates people and punishes them simply for not believing and for nothing else. Despite the fact that in the very beginning he created them in such a way that they would not believe in him. That is not misforgiving by any definition.
Ridwan, there's one thing you need to understand. The general position within the Islamic theology on this issue is that no people are punished unless a messenger has been sent to them. So people are not just simply punished because they didn't believe. So
okay, so that's his opinion. Maybe it's the general consensus. Again, we need evidence that this is the general consensus. But even if it is, I think the other thing is Ridwan added in something extra there, which isn't helpful. So again, you've got to be, I think, in my view, quite concise and stick on one point. When he added that extra bit in there, it now opened it up to critique a separate part of this argument, right? This idea that he's created them all and so forth. I think to me, I want to stick on the most merciful. What does this mean? And is there circumstance where he is not merciful? I want to see if there's a contradiction between most merciful and a circumstance. And if it's this idea of shirk, that he doesn't forgive in that circumstance, that seems a straightforward contradiction. But that's why we need to be clear on what most merciful is in the beginning, or we've got to hash it out in the beginning, because we can't continue unless we have an agreement on this. And if we don't, then it's going to be very difficult to continue, it seems to me. But I think he said something extra, which has now opened the door for this guy to come in with, some other view. What do you think about that view, though, Stops?
Well, I'm seeing the standard apologetic tactics where if you want to say, well, if I say, well, there's slavery, then the guy says, well, there's a sentence in the Quran which says you need to free slaves. So in other words, he finds a word, a sentence, and something which says something different to what you are claiming, and therefore he says, I need to take this one sentence now and ignore all the other ones, and this one will then define what we're talking about. And this, I find highly dishonest. I don't like that at all. If somebody is making one sentence, one claim from one part of the Quran, you can't go to another part and say, well, here it says something else, and therefore this one is better. You can't do that.
Yeah, I think that there's, with regards to this forgiveness thing, that seems to be a big gray area. But you're right, they can also cherry pick, right? Because the Quran contradicts itself, or at least seemingly contradicts itself. You could cherry pick one particular interpretation or one verse that suits the argument you're making. But then again, equally, your opponent, if they know enough about the Quran, can select a different verse. But now if you swap the position around, that particular person might select the verse that you just selected to back up his argument. And it's the same with the Bible. The fact that you can take like seemingly contradictory positions and both of you find some backing in the book seems to be problematic. Now, of course, everybody will say, oh, we'll take it in context, right? But you can even take it in context and it can still come out where you can cherry pick certain verses as well. So, yeah, I think this can also be the case. But, now we're going down the route of, okay, so you're not going to be, according to this guy, this is the common understanding where he got that from. I'd be interested in the reference, that nobody gets punished without messengers coming.
No, this is true.
What is?
What he's saying. This is in the Quran.
Yeah, but is it the majority view on punishment or forgiveness?
No. It's just one sentence in the Quran. Both sentences are in the Quran. So it's up to you now which one you take it in what instance or when you feel like it or whatever the basis may be. This is why I would totally ignore the guy and say, well, okay, thank you very much for that, but let's carry on, because this is irrelevant. Just because there's a different sentence in the Quran doesn't mean I need to go and appreciate it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of one of the things, right, with regards to this, because it's clear that the 124,000 messages won't reach every human on the planet, and indeed they haven't now. So what about all these messengers? Apparently, if Muhammad was the last messenger, so by that light, all of these 124,000 messages must have come before Muhammad, and clearly the message of Islam has not been reached around the world. So what about these people who die that haven't had a message? And so Muslims today, and at least I've heard some Muslims say, oh, well, you won't be judged. Right, but this causes a problem here for dawah, right? Because if you do crappy dawah and somebody's not convinced after hearing your dawah, you could in fact be sending them to hell, because it could have been that they are, quote unquote, good people, and they'll be judged on Judgment Day. This is like an internal critique of Islam now. They could be judged on Judgment Day having never heard dawah, and they could potentially get into heaven. At least that's some Muslims' view that I've heard, right? They may take that view. But if you now give them dawah, and they don't accept it, and they've heard the word of, and they're not convinced, then it could be that they go to hell. Whereas if you'd never spoken to them and they were good people, then the likelihood is that they could have gone to heaven. So in actual fact, that's, that works against you in at least certain circumstances, which seems to me to be problematic.
So we just got to be really careful in terms of that. If you're saying that the standards that the Quran places on this is a logical contradiction, then therefore that discounts Islam. That means that you have a burden of proof to demonstrate that the only possible way to read a particular verse that talks about forgiveness or whatever it is that you're trying to point out is one particular way which contradicts another particular way.
Let's not make a mistake in defining who goes to hell in Islam according to the Islamic belief. Somebody who knows about the faith and who rejects it and doesn't believe in it goes to hell according to the Islamic belief. So by the opinion of, I think, everybody who sits here, and the Muslim population in general, and Islamic scholars in general, will definitely go to hell by the scriptural evidence.
If you die in the state you're in. So we can't say that. There's a lot of examples where people were the biggest enemies of Islam, they took shahada.
Sorry, you wanted to say something there, Stops?
No, I said, oh, please. This is like saying, okay, the traffic light is green and I'm crossing this traffic light, and then somebody comes up to me and says, yeah, but don't cross when it's red. It's silly. There is no reason to go and point this out now. The only thing that AP has done, which is put out superfluous information, which is that you go and get punished in Islam on the mere basis that you don't believe. That was silly. I wouldn't have done that. It's true, but I wouldn't have said it, because you are now giving people, the ability to hook into something, which you can discuss. He should have stayed on his previous line, and now adding this information is giving them a possibility to argue with him.
Yeah, it takes it off in a tangent, doesn't it? And that's not what you want. You want to keep it locked on the particular topic of
correct.
Being most merciful. Right. So now we go off on a bit of a tangent.
Yeah. And you can see the effect immediately.
So we can't even say that about you now. We can say that if you were to die in that state, then you would be guaranteed hellfire.
It's not even our place to make that judgment. The judgment of who goes to hell is with God alone. Yeah, we might turn around and say this person's a disbeliever, this person's a Muslim, but actually the key judgment is for God alone.
You believe, or the idea is that Allah is all-knowing, almighty, and the most merciful, and the greatest good, right?
Yes.
That is
And
the
you believe
point.
that Allah created all of us.
Yes.
You believe that Allah gave us free will.
Yes.
You believe that Allah knew exactly what we would do with our free will.
Yes.
And
Yes.
despite that, He created us at the very beginning, right?
Yes.
Then He set up
There
a
you
hell
go.
and a heaven, which He built, and gave us the mission to believe in Him. And if we reject His belief, then it is our fault, right?
Yes.
And that we, disbelievers, will therefore go to hell, right?
Yeah. Do
And
you agree that it's free by
Perfect.
your free choice? You are seeing the truth and arrogantly rejecting it.
the condition here is not that I clearly know that Allah is real and that Islam is true, and then I reject Islam and therefore go to hell. That's not the point, right? The point
But-
we're making is that I'm aware of the Islamic religion, of the Islamic text,
No.
but I reject it.
No, the Islamic position is that the kufr is when you see the truth and reject it and cover it. That's literally what.
Okay, so but
What he
that's
says, exactly.
yeah, but that's like a ridiculous point. Because the only way you could push that point forward is if you could show that somebody was lying, that you could show that they knew the truth and they were intentionally lying. Now the rest of us have read, like you, me, AP, and many others have read the Quran, and we don't see it as the truth. So this particular point that, hey, you know the truth and you are like suppressing it or you're rejecting it, I think this is trivial, and this would apply to almost nobody, right? It's, unless you were retarded or you had some other consideration that you just didn't care about what was true. You had other considerations. But every rational person who cares about what is true is going to say, well, no, I don't believe it because I don't believe it's true. They're not going to say, hey, I don't believe it because I don't like the idea, because it's an emotional thing. Now there could be a few people out there, but then they would be making that choice not on rational grounds. They'd be doing it on some other criteria. So I just think that this is such a trivial, inconsequential idea to say that, hey, you're rejecting what you know to be true. Then you'd be irrational, right? You're saying, hey, I don't believe this, or I'm not accepting this, even though I know it's true. I mean, how many people are actually going to admit that that's the reason they're doing it, right? So, yeah, I think that's just a terrible kind of reason to bring up. I'm going to just hand wave that away and go, okay, well, that's trivial. I'm not interested in that. Find me how many people will actually believe that. So, yeah, that's ridiculous. So that's of no consequence in reality to me or anybody else.
But what Apostate Prophet did was run them through step by step by step what the Quran says, and that was very, very well executed.
Oh, you mean when he asked Abdul the questions one after another?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I was wondering where he's going to go with it at the end there, because there's different ways you could have taken that. So, because obviously the free will and him knowing is a big problem, but he didn't go down there, which in a sense is good because that would have taken it off in another tangent. But I want to see if they come back to, the most merciful or most forgiving view.
I don't think you can.
What kufr means.
Do we
What
agree
I'm
that
saying-
if I, at the moment of death, reject Allah and do not believe in His existence, do not believe in Islam, I will, by definition, by the Islamic teachings, go to hell?
Yeah, but not by my judgment of the apparent that, hey,
Okay,
this
sure,
guy
yeah.
doesn't believe. Yeah,
Doesn't matter. If I myself,
yeah.
with the position that I right now have, die, then I will, by the Islamic teachings, the fundamental Islamic teachings, go to hell. That is the idea.
Yes, if you die as
so
a
that was the point.
disbeliever and you are truly a disbeliever in the eyes of God, then yes, you will go to hell. There's
Okay. And
no
before
two ways
Allah
about
created me and put me on this earth, long before anything, long before He created the world,
He
and
knew,
all that,
yeah.
He knew exactly that if He gives me free will and creates this person that I am today, I will eventually use my free will in such a way that I will not be convinced by Him. I will arrogantly disbelieve in Him, which is why I will be eternally punished. And that just like me, millions, maybe billions of other people will also go to hell despite Him having given them this free will.
Yes, but
that is incoherent, I think. That is
it's not incoherent. Maybe you don't like it. So I see the power.
Wow, he actually admitted that. That's amazing. Normally they try and dance around that. So he straightforwardly just accepted that, yes, that's the case, right? So I think that where that's incoherent is, the idea of free will and His omniscience. I don't think, again, that's incoherent because He's done that. I say it's immoral, but the reason that it's incoherent is not because He created us and then is going to send us to hell. That's something that He can do. It's a logical series of steps. It's just something that is incredibly, at least from our point of view, and most people, I would suggest, immoral. But certainly it's incoherent to say that, hey, you've got this free will, and yet he knew exactly what you were quote unquote going to do with the free will. That's the incoherent part for me. So I take a different view. I'm just not convinced on the claim that he's making about what it is that's incoherent. But I think you're in line with him, aren't you, Stop? So you are accepting his view of incoherence. I'm not accepting that. Is that right?
Oh, sorry. I thought I said yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right.
Power in the argument. So I freely admit that the argument from evil, whatever the problem of evil in some of its forms, is the most challenging position to theism, right? Are you saying there is an incoherence, therefore it is false? Or are you saying it is immoral, therefore it's false? If you're saying it is immoral, therefore it's false, you have to appeal to some kind of moral realism, some objective standard to say that if it does not match up with this standard, it is false. If you're saying there is an inconsistency within the Islamic tradition, present the contradiction. I haven't seen it yet. No, so you just
I'm saying it is incoherent because God himself creates people that he puts in.
Okay, so there he's put it up. Allah creates and causes people to disbelieve. Allah punishes people for disbelieving. Okay, that is straightforwardly not incoherent. Okay, that is definitely not incoherent. There's nothing about that violates a principle of logic. So if you have some other critique, unless what he means by incoherent is some other view, to me that is definitely not incoherent. Because in order for that to be incoherent, you need to show me the contradiction. He creates, he causes people to disbelieve, and he punishes them. Where's the contradiction there? There's no contradiction there.
Yeah, there's information missing. Yeah. Again, you need to create an analogy to understand it. If you create a car which is intended to do X, and then you make the car not to do what it is supposed to do, and then punish the people for doing it, that is the incoherence. Because the information that is missing here is that Allah creates the people to worship it. And that is the only purpose why humans are being created. So Allah creates people in order to worship it and causes people not to do it, while at the same time claiming he is creating people to do only X. And then they can't do it, and then he punishes the people. That is for me the incoherence.
Yeah, you've added in a criteria which he hasn't actually stipulated.
Correct. That's what I'm saying. It's missing.
Now, if it were the case, I'm not even sure that he's said that himself, but if it were the case that he has explicitly created all people to believe in him, and some people don't believe in him, then there would be a contradiction. I'm not sure that any Muslim would accept that, because that is a straightforward contradiction. Yeah, but the way he's got A and B there isn't a contradiction there.
No,
and I'm not sure that a Muslim would accept your view. I don't know. We should ask Muslims, right? Are you of the view that Allah has created all people to believe in him?
Yes.
Do you also agree that Allah has created certain people to disbelieve in him? Immediately, any Muslim that understands that can't say yes to that, because that would be incoherent. So they have to say something else, it seems to me. But I don't think he's quite made the same argument you are. Go on.
I never know whether it's 51:47 or 47:51. I always get them mixed up. And there it says quite clearly that God creates the humans and the jinn with only one purpose, and only one purpose only, and that is to worship. That's it. So there's
okay,
no.
Now so if we were to take that, and Muslims were to accept that means all people, and then they were to accept proposition A here, then there would be a contradiction. Yeah, I agree but he hasn't explicitly said that, and he hasn't put it in there. So
correct.
Okay. Yeah. If the Muslims were, so maybe that's another line you could say. Okay, read this. Does it mean all people? Do you also agree that Allah has caused certain people to disbelieve? Now, most Muslims, I would imagine, are going to say, no, he hasn't caused them to disbelieve. It's their own free will. But then, of course, you could ask them, did he know that they were going to disbelieve? And you could go down that route. So you might end up getting there eventually. But I think you've got if you're going to go that route, your route of doing it is better than what he's done here, which is invoke that verse, ask them, does it mean all people? And then does he accept that even if you have free will, Allah knew that certain people would disbelieve? Do they agree that he caused it? Because if they don't agree that he caused it, and somehow they think that you can disbelieve of your own free will and Allah can't cause it or know it, then there won't be a contradiction. So again, we'd have to get them, and that's where I see them dancing around, where they just won't accept straightforward contradiction.
I think you need 4 premises here.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I haven't looked at it, but I think we're both in agreement, though. I think, at least as it stands, there isn't a contradiction with just those two on its own. You need to add
I
something
agree.
else in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Into hell for the way that he himself created them and calls this a test, which is not a test. It is simply something that he himself
Freely, but
designed.
you granted it's free.
Even if we wanted to go into the details of what free actually means, we could go into, we have newly emerging ideas of how much people actually have free will, because we are very much neurologically, environmentally, and so on conditioned on how we act in life, which will also decide.
But you grant for the sake of the argument that they are truly free. If you want to get into a discussion,
I don't think they're truly free.
You can, for the sake of the argument, unless you want to get into a debate about free will. I'm saying for the sake of the internal critique you're doing on Islam, in the Islamic positions, these creatures are truly free. Therefore,
I don't think.
Okay, so if you want to go with that view, if you're going to do the internal critique in that sense, and you're going to, I don't know what that would actually mean. To me, it's incoherent to have free will, but assume that there was some way to overcome that. Let's assume that they could explain it in some way where we go, okay, it's just very unlikely that that's the case, and it's not incoherent. Then we could do that, but then we're still going to get back to the idea of, okay, so if you have the free will and yet you've agreed that he's caused you to disbelieve, how do you reconcile that with your free will? Because presumably with free will you have the freedom to disbelieve, but if you've said that if you've agreed with premise A there that he's caused you to disbelieve, that logically entails that he's overridden your free will. And if you're saying he hasn't overridden your free will, then what does it mean for him to cause you to disbelieve? What could that possibly mean? What, that he's just given you some idea and you had the ability to not disbelieve? They can't accept that either. So I think we could eventually get back to that original point. But it seems like AP is not even accepting the free will, which is fine. I wouldn't accept free will, but we could still do it by their lights anyway, and still I think there would be a problem.
I think we could actually get anywhere with that, because we would have to consider the reality of how humans actually function, where we see that humans are not free.
But that's not an internal critique anymore. That's not. So right now we're going to get into a discussion about what free will is, and you're not doing an internal critique on what the Islamic position says and pointing out to contradictory propositions.
Within the Islamic narrative, it's explicitly stated numerous times that the human is created responsible, and Allah even says in the Quran, it's not me who wrongs you, but you wrong yourself. You can't point to the Quran and say that this is incoherent when the Quran's message is quite clear, that the beings being created are making choices of their own accord and that they are responsible for these choices. And then
let's finish
punished for them.
Just because the Quran says it.
So how can you be responsible if God knows what you're going to do, right? It just gets back to the same thing again, right? We go round and round in circles with this. It's just strange to me. I mean, look, you could try and bring up some other argument, right? You could just borrow from the Christians. Well, I don't know whether you could. You might try and borrow from the Christians or something like that with middle knowledge or counterfactuals or whatever the case is. But if they're not doing that, I just don't see how they can reconcile, libertarian free will with God's foreknowledge. In the straightforward Islamic narrative, I just don't see how they do that in any persuasive way, right? They have to redefine something, or they just have to ignore the contradiction. And that's what Yusuf says. How can you be responsible, right? How is the robot responsible in my scenario for the bug in the system that when the robot gets to the 10th, to the T-junction for the 10th time, there's a bug in the system that it's going to turn left. But actually, the way it needs to go is right, because if it turns left at the 10th T-junction, it goes over a cliff. But are you going to punish the robot when it hits the bottom of the thing and it smashes to pieces? Are you going to punish the robot that 10th time because it had a bug in the system? It wanted to, it thought it was exercising its free will, but in fact there was a bug there unbeknownst to it, so it turned left. In actual fact, had that bug not been there, it would have assessed the situation differently and turned right and avoided going over the cliff. How is that robot responsible? It seems to me that it violates your responsibility if you are unable to make a free choice, whatever the free choice is. If that were even logically possible, that just violates your free, the ability to have a free choice.
As it is your responsibility. This is why I'm punishing you. That doesn't mean that logically seen it is actually their fault, which is why he's punishing. It doesn't mean that the assertion that the Quran makes is necessarily correct. It just means that the Quran is making a certain assertion. I could make assertions here about how everything that I have ever.
That's a good point, right? You're just appealing to the Quran, but appealing to the Quran itself isn't good. You need to make the argument. You can say, okay, this is what the Quran says, but if the Quran says something that by our lights is contradictory or incoherent, or there is some other problem with it, then obviously it doesn't matter if you appeal to the Quran or the Bhagavad Gita or whatever you're going to appeal to. We need an argument to show that whatever you're appealing to somehow is not contradictory. So it doesn't matter. He's quite right there. It doesn't matter that you're appealing to the Quran. Hey, the Quran says X. Well, who cares if the Quran is problematic by highlights, then you need to show that, you need to provide an argument. Otherwise, you're just saying nothing of interest.
ever said is true because I know that it is true, and you just need to trust me. That doesn't mean that that you have to trust me.
But this isn't about a level of trust. This is about, you're saying the Quran is making a contradictory claim, and a contradiction is that it makes the claim A and not A simultaneously, the negation of A. It hasn't made the negation of A. It's pushing forward the claim that you are a responsible being.
I think I already explained how it is incoherent, because in this scenario, Allah is basically punishing people while claiming that He's punishing people for their own faults. He is actually punishing them for the way He created them, knowing exactly that this is what their nature in which He created them, what they would do, what would happen to them eventually. Let me ask you.
Okay, so that's a slightly different claim, it seems to me, or maybe I misunderstood it in the beginning. That's entirely possible. Right, so now the claim is that God is saying that you are responsible because you have free will, but actually I've created you in a way that you don't have free will. Now the Muslims aren't going to accept that. Now, if I'm understanding correctly, and that is what he's saying, then yes, there would be a contradiction there, but I don't think they're going to accept that. So that's going to be like an external critique that they're just not going to accept. So
they have to.
It's
in the Quran.
That's a slightly different claim to what he's made before. I think where it's much
more
stronger,
comprehensive.
Yeah, but they're just not going to accept that, right? So yes, you could say that's a contradiction, but they're going to say, hey,
we don't have a choice here.
Well, they're just going to say, well, hang on a moment. Sure, that would be a contradiction. If that were the case, we don't accept that the case. Here's the reasons why we don't accept it. So we're not going to, that's not going to be a contradiction. But if it were the case, yes, it would be a contradiction. So they could accept that that's like a straw man of their position, and that straw man is a contradiction, but they're not going to accept it, it seems to be. But it's a different claim to what he made. And I just think that the stronger incoherent claim is the one of free will and omniscience, as they've accepted at least his original, position A, from that original, text that he had up. So I think
it's going to be interesting which way they take.
Yeah, there's only a little bit of time left. There's like a minute or a little bit over a minute.
Oh,
so
true.
Let's see what they say.
That's unjust.
You're packaging it as if it's a logical contradiction. It's sounding like
I'm saying it is incoherent. Look, it is incoherent.
Yeah, I'm saying that you said that. It sounds more like a moral claim.
It is not.
Then you need to show. What's the logical contradiction. You haven't shown that.
Allah at the very beginning creates human beings.
Okay, so here we go. So let's read it now. So now he's got a slightly different one up. Allah creates humans and their capabilities. Allah gives humans free will. Allah holds humans responsible for their inability to believe in Him.
Again,
okay, so this is a different claim now, right? This is not the same as what he had before.
Yeah.
Again, I don't think that's worded as well as it could be. So he's created humans and their capabilities, right? So human and their abilities, capabilities, whatever. Okay, fine. Allah gives humans free will. Apparently, He gives them free will. Okay. Allah holds humans responsible for their inability to believe in Him. Okay, well, that's predicated on the idea that they accept that that Allah has created humans, as you've said, stops with the express and only intention, which is to believe in Him. So he would need to add that phrase in there then, right? So premise 3 would actually be something like Quran 51:47, or whichever verse it is, says that Allah has created all humans with the intention or the ability, whichever, the intention or ability to believe in Him.
For the sole reason. For the only reason.
For the sole reason. Okay, cool. So for the sole reason to believe in Him, this would then be premise 4. Allah holds humans responsible for their inability to believe in Him. Thus, and then obviously the conclusion is thus premise 3 and premise 4 are in contradiction, or something like that. Then you could have that. But I think there's a step missing there as well.
Well, there's an additional step missing, because I would also mention that God then intentionally and actively stops people from doing exactly that by hardening their hearts.
Yeah, but I think that's kind of covered, although, like you say, it's perhaps you could reword the current premise 3 there. That's kind of covered under premise 3, but you could reword that slightly better. Right?
Yes.
So premise 3 could include some of the words you've used there, and we could tidy up premise 3 and make it
correct, because it's active. It's not something for the inability. No. He's actively causing that.
Yes, I think that he's kind of inferring that that's the case there, and you just want to make it more explicit. Yeah, okay,
correct.
That's fine. Yeah, okay.
in such a way that they will be conditioned to misuse their free will, which Allah gave to them in such a way that they will be eternally punished. And yet, at the very beginning, He decides to go ahead with that, decides to create them, and decides to send them to hell.
I respect your right to believe that it's a cop-out, but for me, a cop-out would be that you present a problem and I brush the problem aside and avoid it. What I did do is I took your idea very seriously, and I actually asked you questions to clarify the specific argument you're trying to make. You said you're trying to make an internal critique and point out an incoherence. I'm not sure you're aware what an incoherence is, but in order to do that, you need to
incoherent, logically incompatible, right? Okay, so here we go again. Let's just see. Allah creates humans in such a way that they will disbelieve. Allah holds humans accountable and punishes them for disbelieving. Okay, but then, like I say, we're still missing that premise, right? That Allah creates humans for the sole purpose of believing, right? He needs to add that in. Otherwise, there's at least one premise missing. Since Allah creates humans in such a way that they will disbelieve, it is illogical that He would hold humans responsible. No, not without that other premise. It's immoral. You could say it's immoral for Him to do that, but not illogical without that extra premise. So I don't know, AP, if you ever do watch this, you have to add an extra premise, at least in one extra premise. And I'm not a logician or whatever. There could be other people out there that are far smarter than Stops and I in terms of philosophy and premises. But at least to my view, there you're at least missing one premise, and the last part is obviously your conclusion there. I think that's the end of it.
Need to present an actual deductive form argument, or even if you're not going to present it in a deductive form, you have to point out two positions that are inconsistent or contradictory. Like proposition A and proposition B imply A and not A. That's a contradiction.
Yeah.
Okay. There we go.
I don't know if you remember what I did with chapter 6, 151, where I take chapter 17 and I say, okay, you are commanded not to have other gods, and you are commanded to treat your parents well. And then in the other one, it says the same word, but the same wording, it uses the same wording, but instead of command, it says prohibited. And there you have this A and not A, directly as opposition to each other.
Yeah, that's just much more difficult for Muslims to understand. So you have to really walk them through that in a very, very basic form. So yes, that would be a contradiction. Assuming that's the case, and I think one of the ways to do that particular one is to get them to read that and to get them agree separately, right? And start with maybe the prohibited one first. Start with the one that you think they're going to have more trouble with first. I'd say, hey, I want to read this. What do you understand by this? Get them to explicitly say what they understand. Then you go to the other one that says you're commanded to love, right? And then you go, okay, you've agreed with us. Because if you do it the other way around, it comes with a baggage, and now they're going to either find a way in their mind to misrepresent it or just not accept it because they can see a straightforward contradiction. So start with that second one first and get them to agree that they understand it the same way as you do, and then drop the other one. But yes, that would be a contradiction. Cool. Okay, so that wasn't so long. I appreciate your time, folks. We've gone a lot shorter here, a little over an hour on that one. So it's a very interesting topic. I think generally speaking, there were some good points. I think the idea of most forgiving was the one that I would have pursued, and I would have stayed on that one if that's what we wanted to do. And I think the other big one, which they kind of touched on there, but it wasn't, it didn't go all the way, is the free will and omniscience. He knows you're going to do all of this. So there were different views that AP brought out there, but I think ideally you're going to stick on one of those and not go on different ones, because then it sort of goes all over the show. But I think at least in a couple of occasions there were some premises missing that would invoke a contradiction. Look, I'm as happy as the next person to point out a contradiction if I think there is one, but if I think it's missing a contradiction, then I'm going to point that out as well.
Right.
Any last words from you, sir?
No, I like this. I like the way that AP presented it, that he put the words in there so that you could actually go and read them to support his position, which makes it a lot easier to go and understand what it is that he was saying. And I think we've sort of analyzed it to an extent, made constructive criticism. What more can you ask?
Yeah, no, and it's always good as well to do that. Obviously, the video was edited a little bit, and because obviously you wanted to keep the main parts there, maybe there was a bit of extra fluff and so forth on there. Presumably he might have the original so people can go watch the original stream, because there were definitely some cuts in that version there. So we're only reviewing what he had on his stream. We didn't see the original, and that may have gone much longer. There might have been something interesting, there might not have been. So we're taking it at face value there, but I'm sure if you wanted to, you could find the original view on that one. So with that, hopefully that's interesting. Obviously we'd be happy to have a chat with AP at some point. Maybe we could do a conversation with all of us having this thing and sort of trying to hammer it out between us, and then we can present it to the Muslims, either one or both, or separate arguments with the most merciful and separate with the free will and omniscience and so forth, and see how they respond. And maybe we could do it either with those guys or whatever, so 3 on 3 or 2 on versus 3 or whatever the case is. Because again, obviously, AP is quite brave to go on, with one person onto a channel with 4 Muslims. You very rarely see it the other way around, right? Where one of those will come onto, let's say, with myself, Stops, and AP versus one of those guys. That probably won't happen. So kudos to that. I've obviously listened and learned something. Those guys are definitely more nuanced, although I was surprised with a couple of the responses they've had. So they would probably be a bit more interesting to have a conversation with. But ultimately, whichever Muslim it is, this is something that Stops reminded us of again, right? Because it's easy to talk about a bit of the philosophy, and I'm not a major and expert in it myself. I just do the best I can. But all you have to do is take it back to the Quran, right? The Quran is the weak point. And once you appeal to the Quran, and it doesn't matter how much philosophy you have this, ball and chain around your neck that you can't escape from. And I think that's ultimately where the biggest weakness is for Muslims. Ironically, they think it's their greatest strength, right? So clearly there's a massive disagreement with us there. But on that note, Stops, as always, thank you very much for your time. I know you've been busy today and you managed to step in. I guess if I was AP, I'd put it, premise 1, a morally perfect being would not condone or allow torture. Allah condones or allows torture, so Allah is not morally perfect. Yeah, that's one way you could do it. But again, you'd have to pass out and you'd have to get agreement on what it means to be morally perfect, et cetera, et cetera. And so those guys would probably be a lot better than the people on Hamza's Den, right? Because they just kind of don't really understand much of those things. I think those guys are at a higher level where they, at least you can try and get agreement. But I think the key takeaway for me, if there was nothing else that I took away from this, or that I would invite other people to do, forget that there was maybe a premise missing, whatever the case is, get clear on certain of the basic premises and get agreement on that before you go forward. If you don't do that, there will become baggage, as I've mentioned before, and then you're going to have a much more difficult time to agree what it means to be, most forgiving or most merciful. Get those couple of those key phrases and key definitions agreed on in the beginning and hash it out for as long as you need, because if you don't, that later on down the line, they'll just say, well, I don't accept that's what it means. Right now, you have to backtrack. So that's why I think it's key to get some of those, main points, main premises or main terms agreed upon in the beginning before you move forward. Because there's less baggage, you're more likely to get some sort of agreement in the beginning than you are later down the line when you've gone down a line of reasoning and they can see where the line of reasoning is going. Then you're going to get a bit of potentially prevarication or obscurantism. So guys, thank you very much. Thank you if you watched this. Obviously a little shorter tonight, so we've had a record 3 in a row. We probably won't be doing one for a little while, at least a week or 2 possibly, who knows. But we will be back. If you think there's any good review videos that you'd like us to look at, send it to us on Discord or send us a message, do a response here. We'll try and pick up. I'll try and find comments. So if you've got a link to one, try to do it. If you can't put the link in itself, give the exact name, copy and paste the exact name, put it in inverted commas, say, hey, Rob, Stops, have a look, and you give us the exact name of the video, and then we can search on YouTube and find it and see whether it's worth us doing a review. So on that note, thank you very much. Good night, and we will see you again, I'm sure, at some point in the future.
Night, guys. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.